All right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Noobie Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and it is good to have you here today. If you're watching the video, you're listening to the audio, either way, we're glad to have you on board for this brand new project, brand new podcast. We're just a few episodes in, and we are here to help simplify photography and photography business for new photographers. If you're just getting started, maybe even figuring out how to get started, or you're within your first few years, 3 years or so of business, this podcast is for you. We're going to help try to distill down to the most important principles or ideas, concepts that drive photography, good photography, and running a healthy photography business. We're going to do that for you here. And we're actually starting with a series called I Wish I Knew. I'm having a number of photographers on the show share a big idea or principle that they wish they knew when they first got started so that they can help you minimize the stress of getting started yourself. You don't have to repeat the same mistakes that maybe they did at the very beginning. So I am privileged to have yet another brand new guest on the Noobie Photographer Podcast today. Kalla Ramberg is here. Kalla, thank you so much for being on the show, coming back and to talk to me. I say come back. For anybody listening in, I run another photography podcast called Bokeh, and Kalla was on the Bokeh podcast not too long ago. When was that, Kalla?
Maybe August, September,
okay.
Something.
So it's been a few months, but nonetheless, I really appreciate you coming back to hang out with me and on a new podcast, and ultimately being willing to be a little bit vulnerable, transparent, and share a bit of what you've learned thus far in photography and running your photography business. You're relatively new to the game yourself. Give us a brief intro to your business, if you will.
Yeah, of course. I know we have 20 minutes. So first, a very quick thank you for having me back. I was on Bokeh. That was amazing. And I was very happy when you wanted me on this. I'm like, oh, okay, that means I didn't butcher it. Like, I've been accepted back. Good.
Absolutely.
So big thank you. Always nice to talk. So my journey, I'll start with the first time I got paid for photography. It was July 17th, 2020. Okay. First time, it was like $150. And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting paid for this. Amazing. My main thing is, of course, weddings and elopements. So I shot my first one in September of 2020. After that, for the rest of 2020, I did 3 or 4 weddings, went full time pretty shortly after that in August of 2021, somewhere around there. So really I'm on 10 months of full time and, maybe a year and a half of weddings, 2 years of weddings or so.
Wow. Okay. So really
just brand new.
Just getting the game, but how many weddings have you photographed altogether at this point?
Oh God. So I thought you'd ask this, so I added it up last night. So it was around 35 to 40 last year. For this upcoming year, so 2022, I have 36 in the books.
That's amazing.
So yeah, I'm very, very grateful and very, very overwhelmed in equal parts, for sure.
A combination of both. Yeah, no, I totally get that. But it's always nice to hear the level of experience and ultimately how that translates to the perspective that you bring to this conversation. And this is an interesting one in that it's not that you've been in business 5 or 10 years, but you've already developed a very busy business. You've got a number of clients already, and you've already learned some lessons along the way. And I appreciate you being willing to share those with us today. So let's start with that big idea. What is that big idea or concept you wish you understood when you started your photography business not too long ago?
I know it seems like yesterday, but also like 50 years ago. Starting out in photography, myself and I think a lot of other people do it because we love the art form, we love the creativity, we love taking photos. What I didn't anticipate was the sheer level of business know-how that you need to run a successful and sustainable, photography business. Yeah. So learning that, which, taking photos is tip of the iceberg. The other 90% is, you have bookkeeping, accounting, and marketing, and advertising, just all of these things. And those things so overwhelming. And with me getting into it, it was a very trial by error process of learning all of those things. And it was incredibly overwhelming. So I know the value of trying to avoid that overwhelm, and recognizing where will I get overwhelmed before it happens. I think it's a lot easier to prepare for overwhelm when you know what to expect than it is to be thrown into it head first and feel like everything's on fire and then have to deal with it.
That is not a fun place to be at all.
No, it's
whether
not
you're just
fun.
getting started in business or you've been in business for 10, 15 years, that place where you have to kind of react in the moment to the stress and the overwhelm, that just makes everything that much worse. So I'm glad that you're here to talk about this idea of how to minimize the overwhelm. And I know it's kind of an ongoing learning curve for you. And frankly, for me, I've been in the photography industry for about 20 years now, and I'm still learning how to adjust the way that I approach work for the sake of minimizing that stress and ultimately the overwhelm as well. I'm a little bit of a workflow nerd, but it doesn't mean I have it all figured out or that I'm perfect in the way that I implement these strategies or principles. So yeah, it's a learning curve for everybody involved. But I would love for you to share, I guess, kind of the big ideas that are behind this effort at minimizing overwhelm. You've got a number of steps. I think we actually wrote down 4 steps that you're going to share with our listeners. Go ahead and just dig into those, if you will.
For sure. So going through the actual steps or the motivation behind them, sorry.
Well, just the steps. So I know that you and I were chatting a little bit before we got started, and we talked about kind of 4 big ideas that would help minimize that sense of overwhelm. I think the first one that you mentioned to me was the importance of finding a mentor. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's a few options for, being prepared for the overwhelm before it happens. So, if you're going it alone, it is a very, like you said, steep, difficult learning curve. So, one option is, of course, the privilege of finding a mentor, or I didn't go this route, but some people do business coaches and things like that. Someone that, they've tried and tested and how they do things is a true method that will help you. So having someone that has that knowledge that can say, oh, this you'll run into this issue and this is how you prepare for it. So just tapping into their knowledge instead of stumbling through all of these trials and tribulations and learning that way.
And the cool thing, and it's kind of meta, right, is that the listeners and viewers are getting a bit of that right now through this podcast, thanks to you, which is really, really cool. And there are, we're going to continue to develop a library of resources in that regard for new photographers on this show. But if it comes to finding an individual mentor, is there a particular way that you went about finding somebody that worked really well as a mentor for you?
So I've been lucky to have a couple of, very different key people in my life who are already in the photography world. I have one close friend who's in the photo and then video world. So, having someone to, leech up a little bit of knowledge from who was a close friend was really, really good. Also for the sake of, you see what they do and you admire them for it, and it makes you want to strive towards that. So it's having this shining beacon of light of, it's possible. It's not just a pipe dream. You can do it too. In that way, it was really useful. Yeah,
the encouragement.
And just being able to connect with people in the industry online. I know it's drilled into your head from a young age. Don't talk to strangers on the internet. But, anecdotally, I've had a really good time doing it. I've met people who have been in the industry for 10, 20, 30 years, who their experience, they have so much knowledge, and a lot of those people know the difficulties of it, and they're willing to help you. So I've been very lucky that way as well. And you can approach people as well if you're in weddings, approaching people and asking, do you need a second shooter, an associate, can I shadow you? Like you said, the tables have kind of turned. There's been a few occasions where people have come to me or shadowed me, and it was a moment of realization of, oh my God, I'm so happy that, with the little chunk of knowledge that I have, if I can help someone even just a little bit, that's amazing. That's what other people did for me, and it's pretty invaluable. And I think it should be this cycle of someone teaches you things, and when you're in a place where you are confident and knowledgeable about those, that you can impart that knowledge onto someone else as well.
Yeah, look for opportunities to share. That's actually really good. And it's, what's actually kind of interesting about the idea of sharing. We're talking about how to minimize overwhelm, and this first step, finding a mentor. so much value in that, because they can help guide you, give you the principles, the ideas, the strategies that might help minimize that overwhelm to begin with, right? As a photographer is getting started in business. But there's also something really super therapeutic about giving some of the knowledge that you've been able to take on to somebody else as well. Because it's easy to get stuck in our head and obsessed with our own issues and problems. But when we're able to take what we've learned and share some of that with another photographer, that can be super therapeutic. So that's actually a really good reminder. Okay, so first step to minimizing overwhelm, finding a mentor, and that's actually really great advice. Number two, the second one you mentioned to me earlier was identifying, or the importance of identifying overwhelm before it consumes you. And this is an interesting one. Like, overwhelm can become this massive snowball that just is so much that we can barely handle it, right? But if we can learn to identify that overwhelm before it becomes such a big thing, then we can squash the possibility of it totally just taking over, I guess, for lack of a better description. So how would you recommend our listeners go about identifying it before it becomes too big a deal?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very tricky thing. So I'm going to throw a metaphor out. Love metaphors, similes, big fan. Have you ever heard of the comparison of, if you put a frog in water, lukewarm water, he's fine, he's chilling, he's having a great time. It's just a nice bathtub for him. But you start slowly heating that water up because it's such this gradual introduction of, discomfort. The frog doesn't realize, and pretty soon he's not okay. He's cooked. So I see overwhelm in that way, is that it can happen so gradually that you don't realize it until it's at the boiling point, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm like a boiled frog all of a sudden, instead of recognizing this is the situation I'm in. That's the beginning stages of overwhelm.
Yep.
So I mean, being very in tune with how you feel and when you feel overwhelmed. So it's and not to discount overwhelm as, a hustle mentality, I'm working so hard. A lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, when we started, you take this strange pride and, I worked for 14 hours today, I got 17 seconds of sleep, I'm fine. Who needs quality sleep? Yeah. And you kind of take this pride in it, and it's unfortunate, and then all of a sudden you're at the point where it's completely overwhelming. And when you're in that stress stage, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do the things that will make you less stressed and less overwhelmed. Last year I was saying that I was so busy that I couldn't do the things that would help me to be less busy. I was like, oh my God, I don't have the time right now in full force wedding season to figure out how to outsource editing or get a bookkeeper or just do anything. It was just getting through it head down. So had I known, I need to check in with myself if I'm feeling overwhelmed and feeling stressed and feeling burnt out, how can I stop that before I'm just in over my head?
Yeah. Well, it's, and I think being proactive in that regard, it's also very easy to put, because I'm a very emotional guy, right? So it's very easy to put too much weight on how we feel and to kind of get obsessive almost about how we feel. There's a balance to be had somewhere. And I know it's going to differ for different people, from person to person. But at the end of the day, you're right. We need to pay attention to certainly the amount that we're working, but then how that's ultimately translating to our physical health and our mental health, and keep tabs on it proactively, so that we don't get to a place where we're stuck, and I mean literally stuck. Sometimes it's we get so stressed out and we are so overwhelmed that maybe physically, technically we can move, but it feels like we can't. It feels like we can't do that next thing because it's just so much. We've gotten so overwhelmed. So being proactive and keeping tabs on our mental and physical health for the sake of minimizing overwhelm in the bigger picture, super, super important. And I know that's something that we could a topic that we could park on and spend a lot more time on. We've only got a few minutes here though, so I want to jump to the third point that you mentioned to me earlier, which is anticipating what systems you need to run your business. And this is like a 3-hour conversation if we had it, right? Like digging into the importance of systems, the significance of systems, for the sake of helping streamline our business and minimize overwhelm is huge. Talk to us a little bit about what that means for you.
So there are a few common things that you can do to really help you. I'd say that the biggest point is recognizing what's your weakness? What do you struggle with the most? So I mean, if you're consistently behind on editing, that's a red flag to check out. Should I outsource some of this at least? Wherever you're falling short is really the thing that you should be giving attention to, and either you can try to learn it yourself. That might lead to more overwhelm, or outsource it, give it to someone else that's going to be better at that. And it's very hard to let go of parts of your business. Like, there's generally so much passion tied up in what we do with our business that the idea of giving it to someone else is like terrifying. I feel like it's handing your baby to some stranger, and you're like, no, they can't do it like I would. And so recognize where you struggle the most. I would say that, if I didn't have, I personally use HoneyBook as a CRM, so it keeps everything organized, all of your clients.
A CRM too, for new photographers who wouldn't know, a CRM is a customer relationship manager, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the level of communication needed to be a photographer with clients is overwhelming, and it adds up quickly. I mean, let's say you have 20 or 30 weddings and you need to communicate with them however many times. That is a massive amount of emails, a lot of different stages of where they're at with the planning, what you need to do. So something that can organize that so it's not taking up space in your brain. You want it to free up that filing cabinet, or it becomes a junk drawer of papers flying around in a tornado.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I think so. So that's been really helpful for me. There's a million things that you can outsource or have someone else do. So I mean, I outsource some of my editing. Non-shameless plug for Photographers Edit. Bless you. He doesn't tell people to say that. I promise. We do that on our own free will. I recently got a virtual assistant. That has been amazing. She's just this catch-all person for little tasks that would otherwise overwhelm me. I have a bookkeeper, and that's fantastic because my weakness is organization and understanding finances. Numbers just don't compute up there. So looking to see what your weaknesses are and what you can possibly give to someone else that would free up time for you. Yeah, that's really good. And the fourth point that you actually made to me had to do with outsourcing before you're overwhelmed. And there's an interesting kind of connection between systems and this third point that we were talking about, and outsourcing. Outsourcing in and of itself can be its own system, right? Where we're delegating tasks to someone else or to another company that frees us up to focus on the things that hopefully will be driving revenue, that will drive growth for our business. Certainly the things that we like to do or that we're good at, that's part of it. But we also have to think about what we need to focus on for the sake of growing the business, what we actually need to be involved in versus the things that need to be done but don't necessarily require our involvement. When I think, Kalla, and we just have about 90 seconds here left for this episode, but when I think about the kind of the major components of a business, there's marketing, communication, the actual photography, image and product delivery, and then the financial management piece. So 5 kind of primary pieces. And I mean, again, major topics that we spend hours and hours and hours talking about. But for those of you new photographers listening in, Kalla makes a really important point here, 2 important points. One about the importance of systems, especially it relates to those 5 different categories in our business. And then secondly, of course, about the importance of delegating as much of that as you possibly can. It helps minimize the overwhelm at the end of the day. And if you as new photographers getting started, or those of you listening in and watching, can begin to develop the systems and delegate as much as possible of those 5 categories, those 5 areas of your business, it truly will make all the difference in the world. And Kalla, I appreciate you highlighting that. I know we had such limited time today, but I really appreciate you being willing to come on the show and just give some insight based on what you've learned so far in business. Will you remind our listeners one more time where they can find you online and on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm of course most active on Instagram. So Kalla Ramberg Photography, Kalla. Oh, he spelled it out. I won't bother.
Well, for those listening in the audio, it's Kalla Ramberg Photography. So Kalla Ramberg Photography, correct? And then the same thing for your website, right?
Correct. Yeah, I didn't get too creative with the naming. Pretty straightforward.
.ca. Perfect. Kalla, I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Have an absolutely lovely day.
Thank you for having me. I want to talk for 17